Hey guys, my name is Calvin Fuller. I'm with House of Fly and the Fly Project. Today I'm going to be tying a couple steelhead flies. The first one I'm going to show you is a fly I call the bite size. It's basically a variation of a fly that I used to tie called the Clearwater Intruder. It's essentially a single stage intruder. It's got a little stinger hook on it, and it is the perfect size for Clearwater steelhead. That's why I call it the bite size. And I call it the bite size because I didn't want to name it the stink hole, and Lewison's known for either the stink hole or their bite size steak, which is, I think, the only place in the world that I know of where they call steak bites bite size.
Okay.
Like, there's so many myths with steelhead. My dad and I named the Columbia River Special, but Eric Gerber and Rich Steele, who fished the Columbia when I was a kid, we're in Sam's attic right now.
Oh, he knew.
Single stage intruders are a thing, right? So I have a return eye shank here. I already started my thread wraps. You can simply just take a steelhead hook, size 2, 4, 6, 8, doesn't matter, and then cut the shank at the bend, or buy the Aquafly return eye shank. I'm going to cover the shank in thread wraps because this is going to be a stinger hook fly. And if you put whatever trailer wire or mono or spider wire, whatever you're using, it will slip if you don't have thread wrap. So I wrap it fully in thread, and I call them ridge wraps, just kind of basically creating little ridges. It'll help bite it in for the trailer wire. So I take the trailer wire and I'm going to get my hook on. I like any octopus style hook. You can do swing hooks. I generally, let me show this. That work? I run octopus black number 2, bronze number 2, just a Gamakatsu. Number 4s also. I usually don't go down to 6s, but you can definitely do 6s if you're doing catching smaller fish. I like the 2 because this is a Clearwater fly, and the fish on the Clearwater can bend out a 4 or a 6. So I don't leave it way far back. I like it pretty close to the end of the shank. And a lot of the questions I get are, why do you even do a stinger hook fly if it's this close? Because it basically just looks like a hook. Well, I feel after years of trial and error that when you tie a fly on a hook that long, it creates a lever. So when you hook fish, they basically, once they, if they start to roll, especially fish that are a little more stale or fish that turn really fast, they can pop the hook out, because this is going to have to be barbless for the Clearwater. We like to fish barbless anyway, but this way the hook acts independently from the fly, so no matter what the fish does, the hook can move around. It's just a way more secure connection. So I have the trailer wire up here. You can tie the trailer wire in, cut it there, or you can double it back. If you double it back, it is way more secure. So if you're fishing for super hot fish, like if I was going to the Dean or up to the Skeena or somewhere in BC, I would probably double this wire back. But I am going to cut the wire and just do basically a single layer of wire. But if I wanted to, I'm just going to do this real quick, you could wrap it all the way up and then double it back and then tie it down. It just gives you kind of a hump there. So I am just going to avoid that hump by essentially cutting it off. So I'm going to get it secure. Make sure it stays on top as you wrap it forward. You can just kind of adjust it with your fingers. And then you want generally an old pair of scissors to do this with, since it's trailer wire, but I'm just going to cut it and then wrap it all the way forward, and then I'm going to wrap it back while I try to keep it on top. Pretty tight wraps here, almost, I the entire strength of your thread. I'm gonna get on there pretty good, usually back and forth a couple times. And then I generally bring it back about 2/3, 3/4 of the shank. I just leave those thread wraps there. And then this is where this fly is going to start. Okay, so I'm gonna run basically some black flash. This fly is mostly black and red. I'm gonna do UV polar chenille. You can do just straight black dubbing. I like the UV because I feel like steelhead and trout generally are attracted to UV. So I'm gonna run UV polar chenille. And the polar chenille is kind of long. If you don't like how long the polar chenille is once you wrap it, you can always trim polar chenille. It's a synthetic material, so it won't matter if you trim the ends. I'm gonna run this fly. You can tie with or without dumbbell eyes. You can do several different sizes of dumbbell eyes. I'm about 50-50 on what I fish on the Clearwater. Sometimes dumbbell eyes are super effective. It just gets the fly down just a little bit, but a lot of the fish on the Clearwater that I generally catch hit the fly when it turns up and comes to the surface. So instead of using like a super heavy wire long spay hook or hook, I'm running lighter hooks, more independent from the line, and I'm running a little tiny dumbbell eye. This allows the fly to sink a little bit. The fly will sink, and as it swings, it comes up to the top, and then you have a tight line going all the way around. A lot of times those fish will hit that fly on what I call the fly turn. It's when the fly turns up. So we're just gonna slap these on there. And I like a little bit of distance from the front, from the hook eye. Kind of run a few wraps and kind of get them where you think they should be. I think they should be about there, and I'll show you why at the end. So I'm leaving myself a little room in the front because I'm going to wrap these eyes in a bunny dubbing brush that I make here while I tie this fly. I like to get them pretty tight so they don't spin on you or loosen. Okay, now that I got the eyes on, about, I'd say roughly 2/3, 3/4 back. I'm going to leave those thread wraps there. I'm going to run black UV polar chenille. Usually do about 3 to 4 wraps of this, and you can trim this accordingly. So as I wrap, I brush back, pull down tight, brush back, come around, keep brushing back as you go. Okay, still wrapping, didn't lose anything. All right, once I get it wrapped, I'll tie it off, and we'll go with the next material. So pull this extra fibers back, do some securing wraps just to get it in there. This stuff is not flattering when it's dry, but when it gets wet, it has wiggle, and it is very UV, which I like. All right, so next little chunk of material is going to be basically some red marabou. I'm gonna do a tiny little red marabou wing. You can do hackle wing, but I find like a little bit of red, generally this red and black for some reason has been working lately. I'm sure it's always worked. I go to about the bend of the hook right there. I'm going to secure it with my fingers and just tie it on top. Pretty simple. That will probably catch a steelhead, but we're going to keep going because we like to keep going, make things pretty. Got my little marabou wing. And I always like to add some barring to my flies, so I just have a little red hackle here. Generally like to find, for me, kind of like the skinnier the better. This one's got a lot of, and you want them nice and straight generally. So a couple pieces of hackle I'm going to throw on each side of this fly. You can run it on both sides or over the top. I generally just like little side hackles. Just gives it some barring, makes it look a little more buggy. If you're tying this fly without eyes, what I'll do a lot of times is I strip this hackle down, and then you can take a pair of pliers and pinch the stem flat, and that'll help the hackle stay flat in the direction you want it. With the dumbbell eyes, it's a little tougher, so I generally just get a few wraps in and then manipulate the hackle where I want it, the length. Once I find the right length, I push the hackle against the hook shank, do a few securing wraps, and it's pretty solid where I want it. Because by the time it gets in the water, soaked, and you're swinging it, it's gonna be where it needs to be generally. See, that's not where we want it, right? So you could manipulate it if you do soft wraps, and you can put it right where you want it. Cinch her down. Looking good so far.
Yep.
Okay, so final step, I generally like to finish off the front of the fly. I mean, you could use a dubbing brush here. We could definitely finish it with any sort of dubbing brush we want. If we want to go orange, we can do like this chromatic brush. But we're going to go just slightly more difficult, I think. Sadistic? What do you call it when you're steelhead? The beads. So here you can get everything. You can wet your fingers, pull everything back just to keep everything kind of out of the way. Doesn't look pretty for the camera, but it essentially kind of gets stuff out of the way since we're about to make this dubbing brush here. So I take a little chunk of rabbit. Or you like crosscut rabbit, you can do regular rabbit strips, but crosscut rabbit strips are way easier to trim away from the hide. You can see the hide piece here, so you just have to run your scissors along there. If it's not crosscut, it generally just comes out a little thicker and fuller, which I don't really want a super big bushy fly here. So I'm just going to make a dubbing loop real quick. That one's kind of giving me issues. That's all right. So I'll tie this dubbing loop in, and then always secure. If you want to secure the dubbing loop end, instead of leaving open, you just run a wrap the opposite way. Makes it way simpler. So I'm going to put this rabbit. I'm going to get my little dubbing loop twister here. Just keep the dubbing loop separated with your fingers. Run the hide in. Let it close. If you try to trim it by holding the dubbing spinner, it's going to slide. You see it slides up and down pretty easily. So I like to grab the thread, put the dubbing spinner at the back of my hand, and I'm pulling pretty hard on the thread, and that secures the rabbit a little bit better. You can make some little adjustments here so you have room to cut, so you don't cut your thread. And then you can manipulate it, spin it however you want. I'm left-handed, so I'm going to spin it this way. And I basically just cut the hide off. You just go right along the edge of the hide here. So there's your chunk of hide, pull that away. And if you let go of all of this now, everything falls out. So I pinch and pull here, take my little dubbing spinner, spin it so it looks pretty. And then you can let go, and then you have a little dubbing brush right there. Is that what they call them? A dubbing brush? I mean, bunny brush?
Bunny root, yeah.
So I generally go about 2 or 3 wraps behind the eyes. So first wrap's not really that important. And then as I wrap, I pull back just like you would any other material. So now that's 2 wraps. Pull back again. 3 wraps. You can see it's kind of bulking this head of this fly up. If you have bigger eyes, you can crisscross the eyes with this dubbing loop, but I'm not going to do it with these tiny little eyes. Just make sure everything stays tight. Then I'm going to come in front of the eyes. That's why I left that little space there. Pull everything back, and I do 2 wraps in front of the eyes. Voila. So you can kind of pull the extra bunny out, get rid of it. Otherwise it just messes up your final moves on the fly. So I'm pulling the bunny back, wrapping tight. So then trim your little dubbing loop away. Pull the bunny back and finish the fly. So you can fish this fly just like this. I mean, it doesn't look super pretty right now, but once it's in the water, everything definitely comes back and gives it a nice little profile in the water. And then if you want something that I like to do too, is I'll actually trim the bunny halfway down the eyes all the way around, and it creates like a little square muddler head. And I'll usually do that after I get rid of or when the fly is pretty much completely done. And this fly is the bite size. So I'll spin it outside halfway down the eyes, and I trim these front pieces off. Kind of gives you a little more muddlery looking head, even though it's bunny instead of deer hair or elk. And I really think the only thing this does for you is just maybe some bin appeal, some confidence appeal.
Sweet.
That one's pretty good looking.
Looks good. Is your best one?
Bite-sized morsel.
Sweet.
Just look at that.
That looks good.